times policies just aren't agile enough in order to support you meaningfully. And that's where the Open Home Network came in. When we were looking into this, we were asking ourselves, how can we leverage on existing assets on the ground in a way that is structured, but yet it's able to organically be agile enough to support a person in crisis in order to buy time for the necessary support to step in, whether is it NGO work, whether is it an application with the SSOs, whether is it an application to get rentals from there. And that's what we've done. We essentially tried to stitch together an entire orchestra where we worked with government, bodies, FSC, social workers, to ensure that there's timely support that's being presented and to plug any of the gaps that otherwise would have been there in the first place. So the way that we have started is I had a chat with a friend who runs the Homeless Hearts of Singapore, and we put out a post on Facebook. And one of the first few things we ask ourselves is that, are there real estate that we can leverage on that are otherwise unused? And what we found is that a lot of Singaporeans actually were very open to let people sleep on their couches, or whether is it their extra rooms, their studies, and make them available just as a temporary respite, for those who are in need, so that we can avoid, the potential for emergency escalation just due to the fact that they are outside on the streets.
Thanks, Kenya, for sharing this. I think it's very heartening to know that a lot of Singaporeans are very open to share their homes as well. Because honestly, in my personal perspective, I feel that homelessness in Singapore is very easy to miss, right? Especially because a lot of these people, they do not really tend to fit the common stereotype of how a homeless people should look like. So it's honestly quite hard to sometimes distinguish between sort of a homeless person from any other members of the public. So I guess with that in mind, right, how do you and your volunteers manage to reach out to them, and how often do your team also visit them as well?
So when we collaborated with Homeless Hearts, they run the primary befriending services. So every other night, their team will go out to befriend the rough sleepers, whether it's old uncles, whether it's youths. And the first goal is really to get to know them. And in building a relationship, get to understand really what they're going through. And with a better clarity of their needs, we are able to ascertain whether something like a shelter or a temporary respite will be helpful for them. And as a result of that, we are able to sort of match them to the families. On my volunteer sites, what we do is we try and work together with the social workers to see what sort of support that the social worker need in terms of navigating a potential person in need, and to befriend the person as well, so that we are able to make sure a lot of their concerns are allayed. Most people think that, it's quite scary and unnerving to invite a homeless friend into your house. The converse is equally true. For a homeless person, it's actually quite scary to enter a stranger's house. And what our volunteers do is, however regular is required, or however ad hoc it is, to ensure that we are able to smoothen and lubricate the process. So that at the end of the day, it's the relationship first. And the more comfortable I am with you, the easier it is, or the more intuitive it is for me to want to support you through, this crisis.
I truly agree with that. And it also seems like a very collaborative approach, right? Not only do the host families feel the same way, definitely like what you mentioned, the homeless people would also feel a certain way as well. And definitely when you talk about the social workers communicating with them, it seems also like a very collaborative approach that perhaps bring together both the public and volunteer groups to help the community. So given that host families are typically involved, right? How do you then identify or source suitable host families that can provide support?
The first thing that we look for is willingness. When we put out the request for families to open their doors, I think we had about 140 families that signed up, which really surprised us. And we realized that in the course of interviewing and talking to these 140 families, it's usually just one person in the family that is interested, and the others, weren't so keen. So the willingness as a whole unit is very important, because if there's a person that's very uncomfortable, that adds very unnecessary strain to any arrangement that we create. So that's the very first thing that we do. When it comes to like preparing them, we go through a few materials to make sure that we are able to set the right expectations. Some families think that when they want to be hospitable, they need to set up their place like a 5-star hotel. And they go out and buy new mattress, buy everything that they think the Rust sleeper will need in order to invite them, without realizing that actually, because they're so used to sleeping out in the open, to them having a roof over their head is something that of a luxury already. So how do we sort of manage their expectations and prepare them meaningfully before we enable a specific match? When it comes to matching, the way I describe it to most people, it's a little bit like online dating. When we started the Open Home Network, we started it in the middle of a pandemic, which was insane. Like none of us, we had so much limitations, right? To work around the relevant authorities to make sure that we can still operate, to make sure that we don't break the laws when we sort of do the matching, all the COVID, safe measures, make sure that you wash your hands, things like that, don't touch. But I think at the heart of it is just like online dating. Before you meet a person, a potential prospect, you first read their profile to see whether there's any red flags, there are any things that you might not like about that person. And only after that, when you're agreeable, then we have a first date, right? Within the first date, do you go home together? The answer is no. We make sure that you have a second or a third date, to align some of these expectations, to set boundaries, ground rules, to set certain goals. And only then we are able to make sure that the match is truly meaningful. And of course, with most families, they very quickly warm up to most of the rough sleepers that we had, like within the first or second week, and we're able to facilitate a move in really well. And of course, to ensure that all the checks are done. Whether is it, are they sleeping in a clean environment? Is it going to be safe for them? Some of the gender sensitivity or boundary sensitivity, we made sure that we draw and align some of these things super clearly. And we are also really, a social worker and a volunteer will always be present to basically moderate.
I think that's interesting. There's really a lot of organic interest from the community to support others in time of pandemic, and like the rigorous. I like how you describe it as online dating. It's really like to understand each other first before like really moving into this initiative together, right? So like given all the rigor and everything in the whole process of matching homeowners to maybe rough sleepers. So like, are there any challenges you face when providing community support to these persons in crisis, especially in regards to like communicating with these individuals or managing the expectations between them and the host families?
Oh, certainly. One of the most common questions that is being asked to me is who is responsible. So whether I ask a family or whether I ask MSF, FSCs, they will look at me and say, who is going to be responsible if something goes wrong? And I think that was one of the biggest challenge, because everybody is quite afraid that things may go south. And I think that sometimes can be quite disheartening, but I think what kept us going on is really the knowledge that of the promise of what could be, which is collective responsibility to examine ourselves and recognize that it is a fellow Singaporean. We are our own people. And if we learn to take care of each other, I think that is a greater representation of who we are and the values that we wish to espouse. So at the beginning, I would say, yes, I am responsible, hold me accountable, keep me going. And we take extra precaution and extra care. So the minute somebody is unsure, we're like, okay, we won't move you in. Let's talk it through to make sure that we can allay your concerns. And we found that when we are able to do that intentionally and there's greater collective responsibility, it's not about when things go bad. It's about how we eventually respond if it goes bad or when it goes bad. And one of the things that I recall that really warmed my heart was a family that took in a 18-year-old girl. And without going into too much details, the arrangement wasn't going so well. She found herself in a police station, and the host had to go and pick her up, and we had to transit her out. And it was quite a difficult journey because she came from a broken family background, and she was always abandoned in her life. And whenever there's a potential prospect of that happening, she gets very agitated. And I remember that the entire experience was just terrible. Like, she was screaming and shouting at us, and we were just trying to calm her down, make sure that we can support her. And the family, it caused that family so much grief and so much stress. And we were just very worried that, if it goes this badly, would anybody want to host again? And at the end of it, we sat down with the family and said, hey, can we debrief and you tell us what's going on? And the family actually expressed so much understanding. And they said that in the first 3 weeks of just having her over, they were able to understand her life story, and they understood like all the grief that she's been carrying, all the trauma that she's been carrying, and the behaviors that she exhibits based on this trauma. And we took heart because we didn't realize how much mindfulness they could exercise over that situation, despite it not going the way we have romantically envisioned. And of course, I asked the ultimatum question. I said, if you could do it all over again, will you still do it, despite knowing all this? And the answer to us is yes. They just needed a little bit of a break. But we would love to continue to support somebody in need. And I think that's something that's really wonderful, because whether we like it or not, even if that arrangement didn't end the way we wanted, this particular lady had a chance to experience what a community can look like that was different in all her life. Because all her life, she's always been living in conflict situations where people didn't care about her. But for a moment, whether it's 3 months, 6 months, or even a year, most of the people that our families have hosted had a chance to experience a little stability. And I think that's something that really kept us going. And we were very honored to be able to see everybody sort of coming around together with us and really just working with us through this.
I think that's a very inspiring example. And I feel like, based on what you mentioned as well, it really takes a lot of trust and time to nurture these relationships and to make sure that all these initiatives that you are putting out would turn out well as well. And based on what you mentioned, right, it also feels like it's very important to have a middleman, because when there are challenges or when things go wrong, then there needs to be someone to also control the situation as well. So based on your personal experience, or perhaps your own perspective, what sort of interventions and support would be most helpful to address the overall issue of homelessness in Singapore?
So I think the first one is in terms of role. In Singapore's context, I think we are quite used to CCA style contribution, which is very thematic. So when people see the Open Home Network, the first thing that comes to mind is, just families who have a house. So for a lot of the young people, be like, I don't have a house, so how do I help? But in our context, for every one family that we take in as a host, we have about 4 or 5 volunteers that are young people. And they go as far as to support like social workers, making sure they're okay, which was so timely, right? Because as we can tell today, social workers are actually risking burnout. And having young people say that, hey, we are looking out for you, we're here, as a listening ear to be with you, can present so much more energy or encouragement for them. And I think that's something that, at least the more when we start to imagine like the different roles that we play as part of the ecosystem, the more opportunities or the more gaps we start to fill in a whole, when we try to address a single issue. So while OHN really was trying to address the issue of homelessness, the truth is we were trying to address the issue of community and what community can look like. And we were able to witness literally an orchestra of care where different people play different instruments, but they were all equal in that side. Even if you're just there to listen to somebody struggle, it doesn't mean that you are less than somebody who's willing to open your homes. And that's something that we try and encourage very often. And I think because HeartBeats audience are generally younger, I hope this is an encouragement to them as well, that, you know, it's not a matter of age anymore. It's a matter of being present, and it's a matter of saying, if I give what I have, it will eventually fit into a larger picture. And the more we are able to intentionally work around it, the more the breadth of the care that we can provide will be just so much more powerful. Yeah,
That's
and
great, kind of. Yeah, I think it's definitely very, very valuable based on what you mentioned, because even when volunteers they are present, they're on the ground, they will get to communicate with these people and they will get to understand the issue better as well. And like what you mentioned, right? Knowledge is very important. It's very helpful to understand the issue, and especially so when the problem of homelessness is so rarely talked about in Singapore, or even openly acknowledged among people in Singapore. So definitely what you share to our audience here and to the rest of the Singaporeans is definitely very helpful. So thanks so much.
no, thank you for having me. Certainly, I think we want to encourage Singaporeans to understand issues, not just no issue for the sake of issue, but remember that every issue has a person behind. And when we see that person and we understand that person's story, there's just so much more that we can learn to care for somebody. And I think that's kind of the foundation of service, I believe.
So yeah, thanks Kenneth for sharing. So being part of the initiative for some juncture was very heartening to see, like Singaporeans and even some, I think like individuals opening up their house and homes to welcome others to join in, especially in terms of during a pandemic. So yeah, it was heartening to see, and a lot of thought and effort put in by your team. I believe like sleepless nights and countless correspondence back and forth, rushing down to make all these work. So definitely, I think everyone was very like appreciative of the work done by your team. So yeah, I think now we will take some questions from the live audience. Do we have some questions? Yes, we have a few questions here. So we have a question from Lionel. He asked, how do you encourage a rough sleeper to join in these initiatives?
As in to be housed.
To be housed, I would assume so.
Right. We don't. When we speak to a rough sleeper, we find that there are some who have clearly their own preferences. So generally, if you are 50 years and above and you've been living on the streets for 5 to 10 years, we will not, drag you out of the streets into a house, because that's quite, I think it's against the law or against his volition. So we don't. We befriend them. Usually the cases we get are a lot more high emergency. So example, one of the more common ones we have is women who are suffering from family violence or got kicked out of the house due to unwanted pregnancies. Sometimes we had a Malaysian man that was trapped in Singapore due to like the clamping down of the Malaysian borders. And we even had maybe I shouldn't say this, but yeah, we even have the older ones like at 70, 80 years old who are health, stricken and actually do need quite a bit of care. So I think volition is very important. And if they want to, we will help them. If they don't, we actually have Homeless Hearts to keep tracks of them. So the partnership we have with NGOs like Homeless Hearts is very key as well as part of the ecosystem.
So hope that answers the question, Lionel. So actually, he asked a follow-up question, what are some support you give to the rough sleepers after they get into a house, and how do you help to follow up with them after that?
So one of the most grateful moments that we had actually happened about a month ago, where one of our family have hosted a rough sleeper, a middle-aged man, for 1 year. And this was really just to help him buy time so that he can work, save enough money in order to get his own place and to take care of his son. And it was quite wonderful because it was quite a journey for them, because he worked the night shift, so he will come home late at night, which if you think about it in your own house, it can get a little bit unsettling. There are people open the door slowly in the middle of the night, and for them, I think having gone through the entire journey and to reflect on like the chance that he was being given, and to be able to have a closure together and to move on from his journey to his new place, was something that we were very heartened by. Our heart is definitely for friendships to be forged. So when we talk to our families, we don't ever expect them to be like a shelter. So we tell our families it's not about putting as many rough sleepers into your house as possible. It's about for you to just support that one. If you think about 1,000 cases in Singapore, that's 0.0001% of Singapore's population. If you get 1% of Singaporeans to step forward, I think the problem can be eliminated overnight, literally. And it's not something that a family needs to be burdened to basically Mother Teresa, right? And say, oh, all rough sleeper come to my house. And I think when they focus on that one and they can forge that relationship long term, I think that would be wonderful. I have taken in somebody, and I've been journeying with him for the last 7 years. He's back and reconciled his family already, and I'm still, in a relationship with him. And that's what we hope. That's not what we always get, but yeah, that's what we always hope.
That's nice. That's nice. So like seeing how they can like transit back into society in certain ways and find their motivation. So yeah, thanks for the question, Lionel. So I hope that answers. Okay, so Hong Liang in our audience has another question. So like Kenneth, just now you mentioned about like sitting when you have the rough sleepers who are going to move into probably going to be matched with a homeowner. So like you sit them down and set some boundaries with them. So like what kind of boundaries do you and your organization set with them?
We have some basic rules. So like example, if like don't enter, your host master bedroom, for instance, which seems very dull, right? But I think we try and make it clear. We had a few and we had to learn along the way. So there are some where we have very, very little rules. And then it turns out that the host felt a bit annoyed because the guest kept eating his ice cream. And we realized that this ice cream issue was very common. So one of the rules is, before you eat, ask first, and to make sure that we are able to agree. The function of the rule is to be able to leave amicably. So we try not to be too legalistic about it. Whenever like a family try to give us a full legal document of the kind of rules they want to set, we try and work with them around the principle of why these rules and boundaries are there. And we make sure that both sides agrees and before they plan their move in together. I hope that answers the question.
To Hong Yang, I hope that answers the question. Yeah, sorry, Audrey, you're saying?
Oh no, actually, I totally agree with you. I mean, I feel that, right, not even just for this context, right, but for anyone who is living together also, naturally people have different lifestyles and different ways of living. So some people may think that certain rules are very explicit already, but it's very important to be straightforward or explicit about it so that at least there is clear communication between the different parties. Yeah,
exactly. Different people have different levels of hygiene expectations, so it's also good to communicate that, because there are some that can actually go on without changing bed sheets, and it can get quite unsettling for those who are not comfortable with these kind of practices.
That's interesting. Yeah, so I think about communication and like because they're living in a common space together, right? So they have to come to consensus and all about everything. So yeah, okay. Hong Liang says thanks for the explanation, Kenneth. Yeah. So we have another question from Taylor. So he or she asked, will the pandemic? So I mean, like this in an open home network was kind of like started during the whole pandemic, right? But the question was, will the pandemic pose like, more challenges to accepting new rough sleepers in the future?
Wow.
Abstract.
I think the pandemic merely revealed where the problems are already. So even without a pandemic, the problems have always been there. This is gonna sound a little bit pessimistic, but I think one of the things that we've researched and we've discovered is that in a nation that grows from third world to first, the more money we make, the more private our lives become. And as we sort of get more resources and handles, the hallmark of a Singaporean life is independence. Like I fight for my own career, right? But the consequence of that is the disconnection I face with each other. And I think sometimes that is an unfortunate consequence. And it's something that is happening today. So a question I always ask people is, when was the last time you spoke to your neighbor? If you have lived with them for so many years, and if you have never spoken to them, isn't that quite odd? And I think that really gives us an indication of the level of disconnection that we have if we feel awkward in the lift when I see somebody who lives in the same building as I am. And it also tells us what community is like today. So the Open Home Network was always a vision that we had without the pandemic. The pandemic just gave us an opportunity to respond to something that is quite an emergency situation. But I think it never really shifted us from the ultimate vision, which is that people long for people. And in a climate where mental health issues are on the rise, I think it was Johann Hari, is it, who said that it's connections that make us who we are. It's the connections that we have with different people that is going to enable us to be able to do things that we otherwise would struggle to get to.
So hope that answers the question. Yeah, I think about people. Oh, okay. The follow-up was, yeah, I think to answer that question, or back to the audience also, like back to Kenneth's point on when you last say hi to your neighbor, or if you step into the lift with your neighbor or anyone in your block, would there be a hi? Will you say hi, or do you like ask how's your day and stuff? So yeah, I think it's from the little actions that we do. So right, there's another question about on repeated maybe cases of rehoming, right? So this question that asks, like, for those who have like I'll put inverted commas, like graduated from the home renting, so like they come in and they leave, then are there any instances where they need to return for rehoming assistance?
Yes, the short answer is yes. Crises don't resolve within a year. If I have an estranged relationship with my parents, it sometimes takes more than a year to resolve. We have incidents where we had to keep rehoming a person for at least about a year and a half because the family isn't used to knowing how to de-escalate conflicts, and the conflicts often get very intense and many times it's unintentional, but the consequences can be very severe. So there are instances that it doesn't happen, that you don't have to rehome, but we do have instances where a rehome has happened.
So actually on that note, like I think to one of the previous questions, so would it prior to you launching the Open Home Network, were there some initiatives by other organizations or anyone else that was kind of like in place that ran along with the same idea?
Oh yes, you can search The Last Resort. They are one of my favorite couples. We are very close friends today, and they espouse those ideals really well. And they are one of the reasons why I wanted to start the Open Home Network, because when they started doing it, they were quite non-discriminate. So literally, right, anybody that needs a space, they will take them in, no questions asked, and to journey with them and support them. And they have taken in people for maybe up to 7 years actually, which to me sounds quite insane, but I think that's just the extent of the size of their hearts. And my heart kind of grew for them because when they were featured, I think about 3 years ago, overnight, they became a shelter, which means that every time they hear of a homeless, they will pick up the phone and call this person. But this couple was just always volunteering. So I think that really reminded me that this has to be a community effort and not just reserved for who we think is the compassionate.
Right. So that actually, we can jump into the idea of, just now we're talking about asset-based community
Yes.
development, right? So I see some of this, some of the audience here today There's some from some classmates or people I've met before. So we talked about that previously. So maybe kind of like to share about asset-based and how it's applicable in the community.
So I think the foundation of asset-based community development is on the concept of what an asset is. And if we learn to identify assets well, then leveraging or utilizing these assets strategically can be really beneficial. So the open home network, right, uses multiple assets. So homes is not just our only asset in real estate, right? Our hosts are an asset because they are always there and they're always going to be interacting with the people. Social workers are considered an asset, but that's once again right? We had designers who stepped forward and collaborated with us to create like artwork and illustration in order to educate the public on what hosting means and what hospitality means. And that was a really powerful asset that we never knew was important. We had people who came in just to chat and moderate, and they are responsible for de-escalating conversations. And for us, we had this whole map. So in our whole map, right, and I think you can search on this online, we have 2 points, which is the person in crisis and the social workers. But beyond the 2 points, we had this whole mind map of all the assets that we have identified that even include things like schools, teachers, friends, the host relatives, and how these assets can be utilized or can be considered whenever it comes to addressing, or supporting somebody in need. It's an organic thing. It's not something that we can program and expect it to happen. There's a lot of like trying to navigate through while it's happening. Sometimes it falls out of our expectations. Sometimes it does. And I think it's hardly something that we can consistently produce, but it's something that we've been quite a privilege to execute.
So I guess from what you mentioned, I guess the community is really important, right? It's not exactly like a one-man show when you want to support or make an impact to our society.
Yeah, so I think to build on that, I think it's really about the role the community play. Because in every community, there will always be one kampong chief. You cannot have more than one, right? It will cause a lot of conflict. You cannot have, too many cooks because then everybody will be very fat. You cannot have, too many young people. Like it needs to have a healthy balance, and it needs to have a healthy interfacing of all these different characters. And the better we acknowledge and learn to accommodate and work around it, the easier it gets. So like once again, in Singapore context, we are very used to homogeneity. So everybody I can think of is usually my age. Like if I talk to somebody very old, I will feel very disconnected, very awkward. If I talk to somebody young, they might be very annoying and I don't really want to talk to them. But if we learn to sort of be a little bit more blind to these differences, then the benefits that we can have, in the grander scheme of things could really outweigh all this discomfort that you might face.
Okay, so I think there's one more like a bit technical on the definition kind of question. So we have a question about like homelessness versus rough sleeping. Like, what's the difference of that?
I actually am not so particular about the definition. So to homeless hearts, we call them homeless friends. To MSF, we call them rough sleepers. For us, the role we play is really to make an impact. We are not so particular about it, and we recognize that in Singapore, homelessness is complicated because of the IC issue. And the better we understand it, and I think that's kind of mainly to my last point. I think having an appreciation of the intricacies of social issues creates or facilitates greater mindfulness. And therefore, it enables us as community leaders or as contributors to serve mindfully. And we are able to do so much more for the community when we understand that. So of course, I'm going to just shamelessly plug my book. As an organization, my team actually relentlessly started interviewing for a year to look for stories of practitioners, of the tension and dilemmas they face when they meet a person that struggles from an issue. Very often when we think of an issue, we think about it as a topic, maybe on a textbook or on a website and all. but when we look at them as a person, it really changes the whole sense of how we see, approach, and even look at addressing it. So our hope is that whatever we have designed today becomes a resource to enable Singaporeans to bridge the knowledge gap a little bit closer. And hopefully we will start to see more courage to do more things, whether it's the Open Home Network or any other initiatives that you wish you want to start.
Right. So actually back to writing on to that point about individuals being involved in the community and being like mindful when serving the community. So this whole idea of finding assets in the community, how can individuals, like the youth or whoever's on the call would maybe like to know how can they go about this whole asset-based approach towards initiating their own community engagements?
I think the first thing you can start with is to have conversations with people. So the specific communities that you want to serve, the more diverse people you speak to, the more you start to identify what kind of asset class. I'm going to talk about it in a scientific manner, what kind of asset class they are. And once you sort of map out the asset class, you're able to categorize them. And when you are able to categorize them, you can see areas of synergies and collaborations that could happen. The second one is quite important, is to journal the process. Journaling the process allows us to do two things. The first one is to record the style in which we have approached an issue. The second one is to get feedback. So when we started the Open Home Network, we never decided that this was the best way to do it. We allowed people to criticize us, and it was so difficult. Like, we had so much criticism from whether it's authorities with all their different sensitivities and concerns that they had, with FSCs, with families, and the more they showed their concern to us and started poking holes on our ideas, the more robust our ideas become, because we can see people's concern and we can on live really just learn to navigate that alongside with them.
Yep. So I think hope that's useful for for us as youth when we want to give back to the community and all, is to really understand what are some of the not only needs but aspirations of the community, and talk to them, co-create initiatives or actions with the community for maximum and sustainable impact. We don't want the case where when we leave the community, everything just falls apart and all. Right. So actually, there's the last question for Kenneth is Matron in the chat asked, what was the name of the book? And you're the author, right? So yeah, what's the name of the book? It's coming soon, right?
Our pre-order is live. It's called Beneath the Rug. So that's the title of the book. So if you Google Beneath the Rug or Solve N+1, you should be able to see it on our website. I didn't write it. We had a whole team that interviewed 30 contributors. So we have people who are beneficiaries. We had social workers, counselors, teachers. And I think there's a great diversity of the stories that are there and the tensions and dilemmas that comes with it.
I just went to look at it. I'll put a link in the chat so everyone can go and take a look and get yourself a book, get a copy. Right, so I think that's the last question on the live Q&A. So thanks a lot, Kenneth, and back to you, Audrey.
Yeah, thanks, Kenneth, for the session and also all the insights that you have also provided. And thanks everyone for attending the session and posting such enthusiastic questions to us also. So we really hope that all of you have gained some insights and takeaways about homelessness in Singapore, or even rough sleeping, right? Because for us, we feel like there is a lot of kindness and initiatives done among Singaporeans, but then very often even topics like homelessness, it often lacks sufficient information or even exhibit a certain level of empathy that we wish to have, right? So therefore, we actually hope that this session has inspired all of you to be more aware of the less privileged around us, and also perhaps gain certain takeaways in terms of providing a certain level of expertise or resources to help these people. Yeah.
All right. So thanks to the live audience again, and thanks again, Kenneth, for joining us on this Thursday evening and having this session with us.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
So we'll definitely save this session, and put it across the different platforms so that all of you can listen to it again.
Right. So actually, the last question is like kind of if anyone wants to reach out to you, like to assist or to help or anything, like how could they contact you?
Yeah, we have our email. It's hello@solvemplus.one. If you want, you can go to our website. You can get the email as well. We do quite a lot of initiatives. I think if we continue to have enough business and we survive, I think we'll always endeavor to keep doing a lot of these community building work. And we are always on the lookout for volunteers. And of course, feel free to reach out. If you have an idea that you really want to champion and you feel like you do need support, do reach out to us as well. And I will make sure that we have enough capacity to support you.
Right. Okay. So I'll put the link in the live chat also, so you can reach out to Kenneth and his team. Yep. I think we can. So thanks everyone for joining us again, and yep, see you again on another HeartBeat session. So yep, we will end the live stream